I'm going to introduce here Dylan Lull with Capital Group. Otherwise, I've always known it as American Funds because I'm old and it goes back a long time. So I'm glad to have Dylan here to present this for us today. AI is certainly a really hot topic these days, and it keeps changing rapidly, I feel like, all the time. I know I've used it a couple of times already in my marketing work here at the office, and it comes in very handy when you've got that writer's block once in a while. It's pretty incredible, but there's also a lot of downsides to it, I'm afraid to. So I'll let Dylan go over all that with you. He'll, of course, open up for questions and things like that. I'll leave that up to him. But again, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you when we're done.
Thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm going to try to stay in front of the microphone, but can you hear me okay in the back of the room? Good. If for any reason you're struggling to hear me, just give me a thumbs up or an indication, and I'll try to speak up to make sure that everyone can hear. As Cheryl mentioned, my name is Dylan Lull. I'm a vice president with Capital Group, which is also home of the American Funds. In my role at Capital Group, I'm a wealth management consultant, which means that I have the opportunity and the privilege to partner with financial advisors and teams across Milwaukee and Madison. I'm based in Madison. I'm a graduate of the UW. I live in Verona with my wife and 2 children. So we have a 6-year-old son and a 1-month-old daughter, which has been a lot of fun. So I'm a new girl dad. I am relatively sleep deprived. I hope that doesn't come through too strong during the next 40 minutes. But it's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you today. Before we go any further, I wanted to thank the IAG team, for coordinating, hosting, and planning not just today's meeting, but these series of ongoing educational workshops that they offer to clients. So thank you to everyone in the back of the room for everything that you continuously do for your clients and the pizza. And then collectively, there's about 35 people in the room. It's incredible to see that you all have a shared interest, in learning more. As I walked around the room and introduced myself to folks, I heard I have a 1st grade level of knowledge on AI. That is perfectly suitable. I think the goal with any presentation like this is to simply walk out the door with just a little bit more knowledge than what we walked in the door with. We will open it up to questions. I would love for this to be a dialogue instead of just a presentation. But thank you again for being here to discuss artificial intelligence. 3 things specifically that I'm going to cover this evening. Number 1, I'll give you an overview of the technology, a brief history of AI. Next, we'll talk about why we at Capital Group view it as being so important, not just today, but into the future. And then finally, what we'll share is a framework about how we're thinking about investing in AI. How's that sound as a loose agenda? Pretty good? Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. As you see on the slide here, a brief history of AI. For many of us in the room, artificial intelligence transitioned from something that we would expect to see in a science fiction movie to reality in late 2022. The timing of that coincides with the launch of ChatGPT. Who's heard of ChatGPT in the room? A lot of us. Has anybody used it? Quite a few of us, and a laugh. That's good, right? That's awesome. I think one of the things that's really interesting is artificial intelligence actually isn't very new, In fact, it's a theory and a concept and a study that's been in place now for nearly 7 decades. So if you look at the far left-hand side of this slide, the term artificial intelligence was coined back in 1956 at the Dartmouth Conference. The founding father of artificial intelligence, there are a handful of people, but John MacArthur was a mathematics professor at Dartmouth College. And in 1956, he invited other mathematicians and scientists from across the world to gather at Dartmouth for 6 weeks. And during that 6-week curriculum, they essentially unpacked how will artificial intelligence grow? What's the research and development that we need to do to make this a reality, right? So there are deep roots that go back nearly 7 decades. You'll also notice that as research has progressed, so too is the study of artificial intelligence. So if I can find it, in the 80s, right, you'll notice the machine learning era, right? During the 1980s, artificial intelligence and the advancements were largely focused around machine learning. Machine learning is the ability of computers to improve themselves through the use of data, right? Can we feed more data into the computer so that it can be more knowledgeable and make better decisions, right? That was the primary focus of artificial intelligence in the 1980s. In the early 2000s, you'll notice it shifted towards deep learning. Now, this is a relatively recent subset of artificial intelligence. And what makes deep learning unique is it actually uses neural networks to mimic the organizational structure of a human brain, allowing computers to make decisions that feel and look a lot more like the decisions that we make as humans. The other thing I'll point out on the time frame here is there are also periods of what we call AI winters. AI winters are simply time periods where progress slows, right? Less development is occurring, and that typically occurs for one of 2 reasons. Number one, theory gets ahead of technology, right? There's a lot of great ideas, but we don't have the technological capabilities to continue to research and develop. Or secondly, the technology is so cost prohibitive that further research and development is incredibly difficult. The last thing on the timeline that I'd point out, kind of what's reignited a lot of the optimism and enthusiasm of AI recently, goes back to 2017. So in 2017, Google researchers published a white paper on transformer architecture. That was the study of this white paper. ChatGPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And it was this breakthrough around transformers, right, that really led to the most recent innovation and wave in artificial intelligence. So when we think about AI, I do think it's important to separate what is generative AI versus more traditional or predictive AIs. So starting on the left-hand side, predictive AI, right, takes predefined rules and conditions to predict outcomes based on historical events. Whereas generative AI is looking to create original content. So the big difference being, again, traditional AI, you're giving it structured data. It's doing probability analysis to try to predict future events based on what's happened in the past. I'll give you an example of traditional AI. The IBM computer, Deep Blue, that was trained to play chess. Does anybody recall this? Right? This was back in 1985 at Carnegie Mellon University. IBM trained a computer to play chess. It used historical analysis, right, to try to predict the next move of the real live chess player. And in 1997, the computer famously defeated the reigning world champion chess player. Right? The computer was better than the best chess player in the world in 1997, but that was traditional AI. Again, generative AI, where a lot of the growth and development is occurring today, again, is using unstructured data. It's trying to create original content. And the other thing that makes it unique is it's highly personalized in the outcomes, right? It looks at the user prompts that we put in and then can generate original and personalized outputs. Right, so helpful to differentiate the two. There's 3 factors that we believe are really driving the continued growth of artificial intelligence today. Those 3 factors are listed on this slide. So first is the amount of computing power that we have available in 2025. Right, it is much more than ever before. If you look at the computation power over time, it has continued to grow at an unprecedented pace. Right, which is allowing AI to continue to grow and develop. Just as importantly, AI and the models that they're trained on require a significant amount of data. We have more data available today than ever before as our lives are becoming increasingly digitized, right? There's more information out there for these AI trainings to work off of than ever before. And then finally, it's the size and the significance of the models that they're running on, right? The sophistication. The way that they provide that information on the slide is through what's called parameters. But I think just at a high level, what's important to know is like ChatGPT is on its 4th version today. There's 3 predecessors to ChatGPT as we know it today. And the current model, ChatGPT-4, was trained on an estimated 1.75 trillion parameters, which is 10 times more than ChatGPT-3. Right. And I think the important takeaway here is that all 3 of these are as equally as important as the other 2. Right. It's the fact that we have more computer power than ever before, more data than ever before, and then the size and sophistication of the models. One of the reasons that we remain so optimistic about the future growth of AI, number one is simply the pace of adoption that we've seen so far to date. So if you look at the left-hand side of this slide, we illustrate how long it took various forms of technology to reach 1 million users. Right, so if you look at Twitter, which is 4th from the bottom, it took Twitter 2 years to reach 1 million users. It took Facebook 10 months. ChatGPT took 5 days. Right? The pace of innovation and technological adoption is only accelerating. If we added a few more zeros, how long did it take ChatGPT to reach 100 million users? It was 2 months. Facebook was 4.5 years. Right? So the pace of adoption is one of the reasons that we believe this is just going to continue to grow. Secondly, on the right-hand side, it is very capital intensive to continue to research and develop artificial intelligence. It's a fancy way of saying it's very expensive. It requires an awful lot of money, but there are no shortages of companies that are continuing to invest in R&D efforts for AI. You'll notice the blue bars on the right-hand side are the Magnificent Seven, right? Those are the 7 largest US companies: Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla. Who'd I miss? And one more, right? 7 of them. When you combine those 7 companies, right, and you look at the amount of money that they've spent, capital expenditures, right, it's more than the entire energy sector combined. Right, so as these companies continue to pile money into research and development, we think that will allow AI to continue to grow. If you look at just the 4 cloud hyperscalers, so that's Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft, those 4 companies combined spent $200 billion with a B in 2024. Right, that represented more than 20% of the entire S&P 500 company spending last year. Right, that's really important, the pace of adoption and the amount of money that's being put into this. When we think about how big of an opportunity set is artificial intelligence, unfortunately, it's really hard to answer. The total addressable market, how big of an opportunity is it? And part of the reason for that is it's just imprecise when you're trying to put a number on increasing knowledge or improving efficiency. Right? Unlike other areas of the market that are a lot easier to quantify. Look at smartphones as an example, right? Hypothetically, the total addressable market for the smartphone industry is the total adult population, right? Everybody has a smartphone. And as a result, right, that equals 1.6 trillion. Everybody in here have a smartphone? Do we have any holdouts? I like to joke about it is every adult, but my father does not have a smartphone, right? He will never have a smartphone. I have 2, right? I have an iPhone in each pocket. So I make up for my dad, right? I've got my personal phone and my work phone. But the thought here is with AI, again, it's incredibly difficult to try to pinpoint how big of an opportunity is it, right? If you could become 20% more efficient, 20% more knowledgeable, what's that worth? Right? And to us, that's a really hard question to answer. The other thing I like to point out on the slide is that historically, people have oftentimes overestimated the impact of innovative technology in the short term, right? They think in the next 2 years, it's going to dramatically change how we live and how we operate. But then we also underestimate the long-term impacts, right? So I'll give you an example of that. Again, maybe staying on smartphones. So in 2010, a group of analysts were trying to project how many smartphones would be shipped 3 years later in 2013. These highly educated, highly informed analysts projected 657 million smartphones would be shipped 3 years later. The actual number was just north of 1 billion. Right? They were off by 36%. The first iPhone was launched in 2007. In 2007, Apple sold 1.4 million iPhones. 2021 was the last year that Apple broke out product sales by type, right? Whether it was an iPad or an Apple Watch or an iPhone. In 2021, Apple sold 242 million iPhones, right? They went from 1.4 to 242 million in the span of 15 years. And I don't think anyone would have forecasted that level of growth, right? And we see the same thing happening with AI. So shifting to kind of the third part of the discussion, I mentioned we'd go through a framework, right, for investing in artificial intelligence. So what this slide illustrates is what we refer to as the AI tech stack, or you could think of it as the AI value chain on the left-hand side. Essentially, who are the companies and what are the necessary steps for artificial intelligence to become a reality so that everyone in this room is using it in their daily life, right? At the very bottom, we have semiconductors, right? Nothing happens with artificial intelligence without semiconductor chips. There's a handful of big names in this space. Has anybody heard of NVIDIA? Yes, right? NVIDIA designs the chips. Broadcom designs the chips. Taiwan Semiconductor manufactures the chips. Companies like ASML, which is headquartered in the Netherlands, or Applied Materials, right? They provide the semi-equipment to build the chips. A lot of price appreciation has already occurred in the space, meaning these stocks have already gone up in a very meaningful way. Right, over the last 2 years, NVIDIA is up 820%. Broadcom is up 330%, and Taiwan Semiconductor is up 175%. Right, once we have the chips, we then go up one layer, and we bring in the infrastructure. Right, these are the cloud hyperscalers that I mentioned earlier. These are also the data centers that are being rapidly built all across the country. Right? The data centers are essentially big warehouses that house the systems that will run artificial intelligence. There is a massive one being built just south of us in Racine. Right? We'll go back to that in a second. The next layer up, you have the large language models. Right? That's how AI is trained. Right? That would be companies like Alphabet or OpenAI, right, in partnership with Microsoft. Some of the leaders from a model standpoint. And then finally at the top, you have the applications, right? So this is how does society interact and leverage artificial intelligence? In our eyes, this is the most monetizable of any of the 4 layers of the tech stack, right? Identifying who are the long-term winners, the companies that are going to leverage AI to create greater efficiency, are the companies that we believe will be the long-term beneficiaries. So the data center in Racine, has anybody heard about it? Microsoft, right? It's the old Foxconn. It's 1,300 acres, which is more than 2 square miles. Microsoft is committed to spending $3.6 billion building out that data center over the next 2 years. But if you were to drive by the site today, right, what would you see? I would argue you'd see a lot of black and yellow heavy machinery prepping the site for the development. right? Caterpillar. When we start thinking through some of the secondary beneficiaries of AI, I would challenge you to think beyond just NVIDIA and Broadcom and Taiwan Semiconductor, right? Caterpillar is a perfect example of a somewhat boring industrial stock that's grown their dividend for 31 consecutive years, but is poised to benefit from the continued investment and growth of artificial intelligence, right? In American funds, we own 17 million shares of Caterpillar stock inside of our portfolios. You go up one level, once they build the data centers, they require a vast amount of electricity, an incredible amount, which brings in another opportunity, right? A company like Constellation Energy. Constellation Energy is the largest independent owner of nuclear power plants in the world. And they have formed a partnership with Microsoft to use nuclear energy to power the data centers. Right? Constellation Energy stock was up 93% last year, right? They're an indirect beneficiary of AI, right? And then kind of the third layer on the other side would be mining. These data centers require a lot of copper. We don't have enough of it. We can't pull it out of the ground fast enough, right? So that would be a company like First Quantum, who's headquartered in Canada, but they operate one of the world's largest copper mines in Panama, right? In American funds, we own shares of First Quantum in some of our non-US investments, right? So again, the takeaway here is that the opportunity set is broad, right? There's a lot of companies that we believe will benefit as AI continues to grow into the future. Here we'll address some of the opportunities and some of the risks that come with it. The left-hand side talks through opportunities. Obviously, increased productivity, right? That's one of the big benefits of artificial intelligence. It has the ability to make us more productive, right? Cheryl talked about having writer's block and benefiting from AI, right? To maybe think through a thought that may not have crossed her head. Down below, you see health and well-being. One of the earlier areas where we've seen some really promising breakthroughs has been in the healthcare sector as it relates to AI. Harvard Medical School conducted a study back in 2016 where they trained computers. So that would be machine learning and deep learning, like we talked about at the beginning, to read pathology images to try to detect cancer. The computers were correct 96% of the time. The doctors, best doctors in the world, were correct 97% of the time. Right? So some people might think, oh, the best doctor beat the computer, but it's close. What was truly fascinating is when you put the two together, you trained the doctor how to use the computer that was also reading the pathology, the success rate went up to 99.5%. Right? It was complementary, not a substitution. Right? The doctor wasn't going to lose their job to the computer, right? But a well-informed, well-trained computer made the doctor more efficient at what they did. Then the other thing we highlight here is autonomous transportation. Think of this as driverless cars, which again feels like something from a science fiction movie, but it is now a reality. Has anybody heard of the company Waymo? They're an offshoot of Google. If you've ever traveled to its 4 cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Phoenix, and Austin, you may run into Waymo, right? Again, Waymo is an offshoot of Google. They are robo-taxis, right? Meaning it is a taxi that drives you from point A to point B with nobody behind the wheel. The car drives itself. They conduct over 150,000 rides every single week, covering over 1 million miles per week. And as the research continues to be done, they are a multitude more safe than the Uber driver, right? That's distracted behind the wheel. It's scary. Like, I get it. It's scary. It's hard to think, right? But these things are becoming a reality as artificial intelligence and other technological advancements continue to occur. But on the right-hand side, they do come with significant risks, right? A few that we highlight here: accuracy and misinformation. It is incredibly difficult to identify when something is real versus something is generated by AI, right? If I'm scrolling through, well, it used to be Twitter or X on my phone for news in between meetings, you can see a video, you can hear a recording of somebody speaking. And for all we know, they may not have actually done or said what you're watching. It was generated by artificial intelligence. That can lead to things like scams. My wife, as I mentioned, we live in Madison, received a phone call earlier in the week. It was a 608 number. She picked it up. She talked to the person on the other line who identified themselves as being in the Dane County Sheriff's Office. They said they were going to transfer to the Dane County Sheriff. And there was then a recording that was created using AI to mimic the Dane County Sheriff's voice, right? Who we see on the news and see on TV, telling her that she was contempt of court, not appearing for a jury summons. She had signed for something. And as she continued to talk to this person, she very quickly realized like this is a bad actor with bad intentions. When they prompted her to go to a kiosk and pay for something, and then she'd be reimbursed down the road by the sheriff's office, she quickly realized like this has no legitimacy to it, right? But that's really scary when artificial intelligence can essentially, right, impersonate somebody on the other line, right? So we need to be aware of some of these capabilities and some of the risks that come with it. On the topic of risks, one of the biggest questions we hear is how is AI going to impact the labor market? How many people in here are retired? It isn't going to impact your jobs. That's good, right? But we do think AI will impact the labor market to some extent. The way that we think about it is it's either going to be complementary or it's going to be a substitution, right? Complementary is simply where it's improving productivity of the existing workforce. The areas where we most likely see this are with highly skilled workers, right? I shared the example earlier from the Harvard Medical School, right? Where healthcare professionals and doctors were able to do their job more efficiently due to leveraging artificial intelligence, right? So places like healthcare, legal professionals, areas where we potentially see it being more of a complement than a substitution. On the other end, that efficiency that AI generates could in theory lead to a reduction in the number of workers that you need in certain roles. Areas that could potentially be more at risk would be things like call centers, customer service representatives, right? Things that could potentially be at risk of having their job essentially replaced by artificial intelligence. And then on the right-hand side, right, I think the optimistic takeaway is when you look at artificial intelligence and how it impacts workers, right, it essentially ends up allowing people to complete more tasks in a shorter time period with a greater quality of results, right? So a net positive impact at the end of the day. And then finally, as we think about AI around the world, the takeaway here is that it's not monolithic. It's very different across different regions. From an investment perspective and from the number of companies that are actively working on AI, it's essentially the United States and China, and then everywhere else, right? That's the left-hand side. The left-hand side is total investment over that time period. You have the US and China at the top, and then a sharp drop. Same thing on the right-hand side as it relates to the number of companies. The right-hand part of the page looks at how optimistic are different countries to embrace AI. Again, you'll notice some of the less developed countries in the world have some of the highest levels of optimism, right? So I point out a company like India, right? India today has a population of 1.4 billion people. They are likely to surpass China by this summer to become the largest population in the world. They also have very favorable demographics. More than 50% of Indian households or of the Indian population is below the age of 30. Right? 52%. So they're very willing to embrace new technology. Right? And then finally, they have less strict regulatory oversight. So that's an area where we see there could be a lot of continued growth. And then finally, I'll wrap with how are we thinking about artificial intelligence at Capital Group. right? At our organization, how are we using it? Over our 90+ year history, we have continuously embraced technological innovations. But kind of how we're working through this today, we have created an AI steering committee. This is a group within the organization that's been tasked with trying to identify use cases for our company. We have come up with over 80 different ways in which we believe AI can make us more efficient across our client, operating, and investment group. A few examples, we do use AI now to generate research summaries for our portfolio managers. We have 500 investment professionals at Capital Group. Last year, those people conducted 20,000 research visits with companies around the world, trying to decipher if we should be investing in them. We're now using AI to generate those summaries instead of having real live humans do it. But again, it's not replacing those individuals, it's complementary. Another area of our business that we've leaned into AI is marketing. If you give it a task, maybe the cover page of the Outlook I put in front of you, right? AI can be very supportive in a lot of those initiatives. So again, the three things that I attempted to walk through today and cover, right? We wanted to give you a high level overview of what artificial intelligence is. Right? Again, it's not a new theory. It's been around for 70 years. We talked through why we believe it's so important, right? What's making it grow at such a fast pace today. And then finally, that framework for investing. So I'd love to open it up, see what questions you have, see if we can answer any of them. Does anybody have any questions? And there are no bad questions.
I assume that in those buildings that are built, those are supercomputers that are housed in those?
Yes, essentially. That is a very good way to put it. The question was, in these big data centers that are being built that are the size of multiple football fields, they essentially have supercomputers inside that are running on and training AI using, again, those large language models. If we go back to the tech stack, right? The models, second from the top, they're running on the large language models, training the AI, right? And then eventually it will be turned into an application for end use.
Who are the suppliers of those supercomputers?
So the supercomputers themselves, so the semiconductor chips, we talked about NVIDIA and Broadcom are the two that designed them. Taiwan Semiconductor creates them. To create the chips themselves, the two companies I gave you were ASML and Applied Materials. Going up a layer, like the who has inputs into the actual supercomputers, I would bet there's a bunch of names there, if I had to guess. The names I'd put on the infrastructure level would be Amazon, Microsoft, and Arista is like three examples of the companies that are investing heavily in the infrastructure. And then again, the models, I said Alphabet and OpenAI in partnership with Microsoft are two of kind of the leaders in that space. And again, I gave some examples about like Caterpillar stock is an indirect beneficiary and Constellation Energy. But you could go on for another 10 names of other indirect beneficiaries. If you built a building the size of a football field and jammed 1,000 computers in it, is it important that we maintain an appropriate temperature inside of the room, right? Do they want to run really hot? No, right? A company like Carrier Global, right? There's another non-super exciting company that is a leader, right, in air conditioning that again would benefit as we continue this development.
So who is working on the security and the factual nature of it? Because it's not clear. Meta, Facebook,
Yeah.
Anybody like that seem to care about reality versus.
I agree. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer to it. At the end of the day, who's responsible for the regulation and the oversight to keep us safe? It's a very valid question. I don't know where that gets done. I don't know what that looks like. I think it's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer to it, though, unfortunately. right? Like for us as an organization, the reason why we created a steering committee internally was to make sure that we're doing it in the right way while always continuing to prioritize what's best for our shareholders, right? For our clients. Because again, when you think through the risks, they are inherent and meaningful and sizable, right? It needs to be regulated. I don't have a great answer.
I think I can help with that a little bit.
Please.
A company that does their own AI applications has to provide the right input, the right data into those models, and get them to work correctly. So if you're a physician and you're going to be working with an AI model, you want something that's been trained on all of the population, not just the white males, not just the white females. It has to be everybody of every ethnic background. Or if it's not trained that way, it won't make the right decisions for those people. So it's really up to each individual company to create some AI model to make bad actors are going to do the same thing, and they're going to get their spamming down to a real science.
Yeah, as I was scrolling on X the other day, there was obviously a conversation that was held at the White House 1 week ago, with Zelensky and Trump. And, you know, there's a video of the two like wrestling, which didn't occur, right? But like you put on the video and you're like, this sure looks real. It looks like their verbal altercation progressed into a physical one. I'm like, that didn't happen. But again, it's like you need to find a way to police this to some extent. Because of the risks, right, that we talk through.
I wanted to get back to that first question about the area in the city.
Mm-hmm.
You said it's about a 2 square mile
Mhm.
area, which I would imagine is mostly filled.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that there's going to be several of these built around the country.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because, 2 square miles of supercomputers can't generate enough AI for the entire country? Is it just a regional thing, or why?
Yeah, so there's a few things to unpack there, and it's a great question. One is you have competing companies essentially trying to build data centers to stay on the cutting edge of the research that's occurring. I think to keep up with the continued pace and the development, like we're going to need more at some point. But yes, it's not unique to Racine. There are other data centers. If you went to Des Moines, Iowa, right, Microsoft has 6 of them kind of spread out across the Des Moines area. So I think there's a number of reasons that are leading to the continued build out of the data centers. One is the continued advancements of the technology. 2 is competing companies, right, trying to stay ahead of the other. As they continue to grow.
And the other is infrastructure. They can't put them all in one place because there's not enough electricity.
Correct. Yeah.
So that each one could be a different company.
It could be. Yeah. In theory. Yeah. As I said on the second slide, right, I get a handful of examples of the companies that are on kind of the leading edge of the spending from an infrastructure standpoint. Yes, being done by multiple companies, not just one.
And all of these supercomputers are making different models, not one. They're making hundreds, thousands, millions.
Correct.
Every different example in life for automation.
Yeah.
So there's.
So these data centers aren't like specialized. This one is medical information. This one is stuff on transportation. This stuff is.
No, not to my knowledge. Yeah. No specialization as it relates to the physical site itself, right?
So they're all just competing against each other.
To some extent, yes. Yeah. Cheryl?
I was sitting here thinking, it's hard for me to wrap my brain around all of this stuff, right? I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people. And one of my first thoughts is always like, well, do you go to school to become an AI expert, right? But, really, I think from my perspective, there's really just a lot of opportunity in every industry because of how it just trickles out and down to everything and flows up to AI, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's like a lot of industries, right, where you benefit from people from diverse backgrounds with different academic and educational backgrounds that are going to help lift everything higher. Is it Kathleen? Kathleen asked me, she's like, did you like go to school for AI? It's like, no, I have a degree in finance from Madison, like very traditional finance. I was like, I've done some training, internally on AI. But yeah, there are, right? There's programs and courses of study that absolutely are going to be focused on this type of information. But to your point, I think it's very broad, right? At the end of the day, absolutely, especially when we get into the applications, right? And how this is going to be leveraged.
Here's kind of AI presentation happened to be monthly with retirees, but they brought in WCTC as a speaker. They're setting up a program. They're under development on AI, working with industry to see what do they need, what kind of skill sets.
Yeah. We use it at work personally in my role. Microsoft Copilot is what we use for AI. It's really helpful. I type an email up and it can propose changes to my email around like the tone of my message. It like picks up on your tone and tries to find ways to improve it. I can take, a document like the one I passed out that's 21 pages long and say, hey, I can drop it in there and say, hey, summarize this into 4 bullet points for me. From an efficiency standpoint, right? All the time savings that it can create. Just wait until I'm in a driverless car, taking me to my meetings and having AI do my presentations, right? As I sit in the beds. My goals will quadruple that year, I'm sure, right?
You said you sampled using your email,
Mm-hmm.
which you're going to send out to your peers, and it picked up on the tone.
Mm-hmm.
Which way does it know to take your tone?
It's a great question. It does. It picks up on your tone and then essentially asks you, like, would you try to make it more of what we think it is, or do we need to shift course here? Are you not accurate in your tone? So yeah, it kind of gives you, it allows you, again, deep learning, remember, it's highly personalized, right? It allows you to control with user inputs to create custom outputs, right? That's kind of an example of we're catching a tone of professionalism. Would you like us to try to make this more professional, or should we make it more casual? It allows you to kind of choose how it would suggest changes.
We always had to tell my dad, he typed everything in capital letters, like with an email. I was like, Dad, you can't do that. People think you're angry.
You're yelling at us constantly.
Right.
Capital letters, that's a loud voice. Yes.
So we think that ChatGPT or Microsoft Pilot is giving us the final answer. How do you check them right?
How do you fact check it?
They're learning all the time.
Yeah.
Have they gotten enough information to make that?
It's a great question. There's been a lot of studies done on like how well is the information that ChatGPT or other types of competitors that it's pushing out, and they continue to get better and better. There's some headlines out there around like ChatGPT just took the LSAT, right, for law school and scored in the top 10 percentile of all people who would have taken the test, and ChatGPT 3, the predecessor, was in the bottom 10%. Okay, so they made a ton of improvements in terms of the accuracy of the data, but I would say it's smart to never assume it's 100% accurate, right? Fact check. It's complementary, not a substitute, right? Use our own brains. Don't rely on the brains of the computer all the time, right? Maybe check a second source if you're questioning the accuracy of the output.
Doesn't it still make stuff up sometimes? I thought sometimes it went rogue.
Yeah, very well could. I don't know.
Created stuff that's just wrong.
Yeah, I'm sure there's countless examples of that as well, right?
I was recently writing something for one of the advertisements or whatever that we're doing in a local publication, and I had to condense it down to 500 words. That was the max, right? So I put it into ChatGPT and I said, you need to rewrite this into 500 words. And they quickly read it in 15 seconds. So it's all rewritten. I was like, wow. So then I dumped it into my Word document and I did my word count, and it was 578 words. And I went back and I said, excuse me. I told you 500 words. Okay. So it's like I was talking to Ann, she left already, but I said, do we refer to this as a she or a he or what? It's crazy to think of what's going on behind all this. It did. Yeah. And then I massaged it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You get it right the second time.
Yes.
And one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The term quantum computing.
Yes.
Gets thrown around.
It is.
Is that the next generation
Yeah, absolutely, right? I think it's the kind of the next generation of continued advancements. There's been a handful of quantum computing stocks that have been on an absolute tear up until earlier this year when the CEO of NVIDIA spoke, Jensen Huang, and he said quantum computing is a decade out plus, like it's not going to be here overnight. And as a result, those stocks kind of fell off a cliff. But yes, I think absolutely that is again, if I went back to one of the first slides, right, where I showed AI has been around for 70 years, but the focus of the study has changed as we make progress on the research. It's not going to end at deep learning. That's just where we are today, right? And quantum computing very well could be the next chapter, right, of research and development as we continue to learn more.
What does that word mean? Quantum computing.
Told you I was a finance major, not a science major. You have to ask, I'll have to ask ChatGPT, how do you define quantum computing in an easy to understand way? They'd have a good answer. They
I
would.
think it has to do with the amount of calculations per nanosecond. It's 10 or 100-fold.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I can actually pull it up and ask it on my phone. It'll give me a good answer.
Google will tell you.
Yeah, it would. And good old fashioned Google still works, right? It definitely does.
And Google uses AI.
Yes,
Yeah, right.
it does. Yeah. Well, I thoroughly enjoy and appreciate your engagement, right? There was no shortage of questions. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you today. As I said at the beginning, the three things I was aspiring to try to give you a little bit of insight on. Again, what was the technology, why we think it's so important, and then that framework for investing. The slides that I walked through, Cheryl had passed out to everybody. I also included a version of the Capital Group 2025 Outlook. I didn't reference this in the presentation, but pages 8 and 9 specifically address AI. So page 8, I kind of verbally talk through. Remember my story about smartphone shipments in 2013, kind of the underestimation. Right? Overestimated in the short term, underestimated in the long term. That's what page 8 illustrates for personal computers, internet, smartphones in the cloud. And then page 9 was the AI tech stack, right? Semiconductors, infrastructure, models, apps. And then the right-hand side were some of those older economies that, again, we believe will be indirect beneficiaries. So I thought I'd pass that out as a takeaway as well. But thank you. I appreciate it. And I'll stick around if there's any other questions, but I want to keep everybody on time. But thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.